Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a new week on Humanity Rising. You know me from the Ubiquity team. My name is George, and today we will have a session on Native American healing wisdom. Jim is still stuck in Mexico with less internet than expected, but we are joined by a live guest, Ken Cohen, who Jim will introduce himself and also set the stage for in a introductory clip he has created from Mexico, which is around 6 minutes. And so, without further ado, I will play this clip, and then I will introduce Ken for you guys, so we can have a wonderful session on this. And Jim will be back in person on Wednesday. So I'm going to go ahead and share this little welcome message by Jim so we can get started here and introduce Ken, our live guest who is waiting for us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As you can see from my background, those of you who've been attending over the last couple of days, I'm still at the Dreaming House in Teotihuacan. A number of students and faculty have remained after our event that ended yesterday. We had a 7-day pilgrimage to the Teotihuacan Pyramid Complex, one of the most extraordinary architectural achievements of humanity ever built, almost a replica of the Great Pyramid Complex in Egypt, there at Giza, outside of what is now Cairo. And it was very inspiring. The weather was actually quite beautiful. We had Hurricane Alberto in the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Mexico, rather. And the weather, therefore, here was not unbearably hot as was predicted, but there was just a quiet, soft rain here and there, but it was very, very benign. And the spirit was very strong. I've done a lot of these pilgrimages, and I would say there were two things that emerged for me about this group. One was the faculty and pilgrim coherence. This group came together instantly and very powerfully. And we held ceremonies and rituals and dreaming and sacred practice and whirling and journeys to the pilgrims and into Mexico City to the shrine of Guadalupe. And the group coherence remained extremely strong from start to finish. You know, oftentimes there's a bad apple in the barrel, and that causes friction or tension that it reverberates through the group. But there was none of that this week. It was just a beautiful energy from start to finish. Secondly, what stood out for me was the potency of this place. The Mayan culture, even though it has receded now for 5-6 centuries, is still powerfully present. You know, the temple of the jaguar, the portal that goes into the center of that temple is still potent. You can feel the energy at the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, the pyramid to the feathered serpent. As you walk up the avenue of the dead from Quetzalcoatl to the pyramid of the moon, and you pass the pyramid of the sun on your right, you feel the energy that is still potent. And even though tourists and people that don't understand, when they come, you can feel that they're humbled and infused by energy that they may not even recognize but they leave with greater solace in their souls. And that was certainly the case for us, who, even with the Western mind that plagues so many of us, you could just feel the energy of the place day by day and ceremony by ceremony, infusing our hearts with a deeper reverence and love, not only for the mother, but for each other. So I want to thank all of you for supporting us. We remembered the Humanity Rising and Ubiquity communities and all the communities that join in day by day. We were also conscious that there were activities around the world at the solstice, all dedicated within the framework of the Kogi prophecy. And it was just, it's left my heart very full. And so I just wanted to note that. Today we're going to hear from Kenneth Cohen, and he's a professor and has studied the Native Americans very, very deeply over many, many years. And he's going to make a presentation. Then I think he'll be joining the after chat. I'm sorry that I'm not here to be able to engage with him. As you all know, I love to do. But it's been important for me in the aftermath of such an extraordinarily powerful, energetic experience, just to take a few days with some of the other faculty and students to just unravel. I do that every year in Chartres. I seldom leave Chartres for at least 1 or 2, 3 days after the event, because it just takes that much time, at least in me, to process everything that is taking place. And then the week will unfold. On Wednesday, we're going to have Shannon and Roberto and a number of others of our students just to talk about their experiences at Teo. So we want to bring that energy in and share it with all of you. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to Humanity Rising. And now I'll turn the program over to Kenneth Cohen.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim, for this introduction. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Kenneth Cohen, who has a presentation for us. Dear, the show is yours, Ken. And then towards the end, we will ask the questions from the chat and then move on to the after chat. Thank you so much.
Tansi, ni wakomugunak, ni totamak. Hello, my friends and relatives. My name is Ken Cohen. My Cree name is Musqueam. That means bear hawk. I'm a Jewish American by birth, ancestry from Belarus and Ukraine. But I've been following this way of life. I felt a little odd when Jim said studying. I know that's perhaps the politically correct thing to say, but this is how I was raised. I was adopted by a Cree or Nehio family in my youth, was trained strictly by various elders. I hope, friends, sometime we have a chance to speak again, because I'd love to tell you more of that story and how I was tested, and also perhaps a bit about the protocols involved in greeting and making relations with Native people, especially if you're not born into that culture. But again, this has been my lifelong path and passion. Now, you see some smoke. No, there's no fire here. Look, this is a smudge. This is sage that I picked, of course, with prayer, with proper tobacco offerings. And why do I have this burning? Why do I have this going? Because to speak about healing within the context of Indigenous culture, this is not, I'm not primarily an academic. I'm comfortable in that context. But to speak authentically about Native American First Nations healing is to invoke the gaze and the presence of the Manitou, of the Atayal Kanak, of the helping spirits. It's a sacred task and responsibility. And so in their honor, I always offer sage first. This is actually sage with sweetgrass. And I always open with a short prayer. So I ask at this time that the wind of the south and the west, north and the east, and Okoimawaski, our Mother Earth, and the stars and sky beings, and most especially Ximantu, the great mystery, might receive this offering of gratitude. And I ask that my mind and heart be open to your great wisdom and love so I can speak with truth, with authenticity, and that I be forgiven for any mistakes I make or things that I leave out from this very spontaneous talk. No, I do not script my talks. I try to speak from the heart, spirit, and mind. I do my best. So I offer this sacred smoke with gratitude to you, great Creator, and to all of you, friends and guests who are listening in at this time, or who will join us and listen in the future. Hi, thank you. So now I'm going to start some screen sharing. Let's hope the technology works. I'll be doing a PowerPoint. There will be time for some questions and answers at the end. You're welcome to put your questions into the chat at any time, and one of our hosts will field the questions at the end, and I will try my best to answer them. So give me a moment, please, and we will start this screen sharing. And if there is any glitch and you're sure it's not coming from your computer or your device, please do let us know. So again, I'm going to be speaking about Native American healing wisdom. And this is rather similar to a talk I've given to various medical schools. As far as I know, I was the first person to speak about indigenous medicine, specifically Native American First Nations, in medical schools. I've been doing this for quite a while. I had the of being, I think, one of the perhaps only people that was hosted for 2 consecutive Grand Rounds lectures at the Mayo Clinic Medical School. But I've also spoken at various clinics and hospitals and so forth. I'm very interested in creating respectful dialogue as partners in healing between indigenous medicine and Western medicine. And I'm saying partners very specifically because it's not that, in my view at least, Native American medicine doesn't need to prove itself in terms of Western medicine, any more than Western medicine needs to prove itself in terms of Native American medicine. They are complementary paradigms. I believe both are true. One is not more true than the other. So again, the question is, can they engage in respectful dialogue? This, by the way, is an actual stethoscope. It's not my own. It's a stethoscope that a medical doctor beaded. I believe he was a native himself and works with an indigenous population. So yes, it's possible to engage in respectful dialogue, but again, I don't want to suggest that science, Western science, is the only avenue to truth, because that to me is actually a religious assumption. So let me try to clarify this just a little bit. Here are some, what I would call unproven assumptions: that science is the only rational form of inquiry, that scientific knowledge validated by scientific method is the only authentic form of knowledge, and that science is, as I said, the only justifiable access to truth. I believe that is not true. And unfortunately, it goes beyond that. Science has become, I would say, religious dogma. so much so that some scientists will deny or ignore the evidence if it doesn't match pre-existing theory. Well, that is the opposite of good science. But again, science has become so entrenched in a particular worldview that sometimes it works against itself. So here's a quote from Sir John Eccles, neuroscientist, Nobel laureate. Arrogance is one of the worst diseases of scientists. I'm not saying this of all scientists. I know some great scientists that I have deep respect and love for, but there's some truth to this. Arrogance is one of the worst diseases of scientists, and it gives rise to statements of authority and finality. It is important to realize that dogmatism has now become a disease of scientists rather than of theologians. Perhaps I would have put it rather than exclusively of theologians. So here it's really a different world presented by at least conventional Western philosophy and by people like Isaac Newton or René Descartes, who very famously said, "Je pense donc je suis." Forgive my poor accent. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This to me is an imbalanced viewpoint. Is who we are a matter of thinking? Are we only hemispheres of the brain? Of course, they didn't really know about left and right hemisphere at the time Descartes said this. As one of my Native American elders put it, the longest journey we take in life is the trail that leads from the head to the heart. And by heart, I mean not just the emotional heart, but the spiritual heart. So again, I feel that the Western paradigm has been dominated by this view of the all importance of thinking. In fact, let me tell you something, friends. When I look at people spiritually, if I do some people watching, sit in a cafe and just watch people passing by, and my spiritual eyes, if they're really open, sometimes I think, how do they carry around those huge left hemispheres? Because it seems to project energetically so far, I feel like they should be carrying it in a wheelbarrow. So again, I think we need to have more balance in our education, that we're too much oriented towards, dare I say it, education, education rather than real education, which needs to include body, mind, and spirit. So we need to ask these important questions. And here we get to some of the themes that have arisen so often in the Humanity Rising presentations by my esteemed colleagues. Are individuals and societies healthier, happier, and more sustainable today as a result of science and technology? Have we been responsible in our care of the earth, or have we stolen the future from the coming generations? So, look, I know we have some Indigenous brothers and sisters, perhaps some elders among the audience. And some of you may be wondering, hey, who is this guy? I don't blame you. People get confused by the color of my skin. This, by the way, this photo was taken by me about 20 minutes drive from where I live. This is very, very similar to where I live, where I'm speaking to you from right now. I live in a little town, population, it's summertime, so it's probably up to 150 people, but in the winter it goes down to about 75. I'm at 9,000 foot elevation, surrounded by much higher mountains. So this is the kind of area where I've lived much of my life. So let me tell you a little bit about my journey on this road. I can't tell you the whole story, but a few highlights perhaps to satisfy your curiosity, or for some of you, perhaps your skepticism. First of all, what's a nice Jewish boy like me doing in a place like this? Hey, look, I did find, look at this picture. Isn't it extraordinary? I found in an old photo album a picture of one of my ancestors. I believe this was my great-grandfather named Chief Gefilte Fish. Chief Gefilte Fish. Okay, I'm joking. If you don't know Yiddish, that's a Jewish food. That's not a real picture. It's a fake. There's a saying, you don't choose the medicine, it chooses you. I never intended to walk this path. It happened. I really, seriously, I had no choice in the matter whatsoever. And I only learned about Judaism, which is my ethnic background, as an adult. I met my first rabbi when I was in my 20s. I was not raised within that tradition. I have great respect for it. I have great respect for my biological ancestry. But it's not the way I was raised or the way that I think. Hopefully, it's not the sole definition of who I am. So, yes, I acknowledge my ancestry, but that's not my culture or my training. But then how did I come to this path? Again, it's a long story, but let me give you just that barest outline. First of all, I've got to tell you this one story first about that has to do with my Jewish ancestry. I was sitting one time with this dear elder, Steve Musselman. I believe he's now passed on. I knew his dad, John Musselman, very well-known medicine man and spiritual leader among the Plains Cree. So one day I'm sitting around with Steve and with my adoptive brother, Joseph. It was his dad who had adopted me years earlier. And we're talking about different aspects of First Nations culture. And I asked our elder there, Steve, the one you see me pictured with, I said, Uncle, have you ever heard any of the songs from those Ish tribes, like Swinomish, Skokomish, Duwamish, Snohomish, Squamish, and so forth? They're from the Pacific Northwest near the Puget Sound or Washington State region. He said, no, I've never heard any of those songs. I don't know much about those cultures. I've never been, outside of the province here in Saskatchewan. I said, would you like me to sing some for you? He said, yeah, I'd like that very much. So I'm a song keeper, by the way. I keep about 300 or maybe 350 songs, traditional Native American songs in memory. I had to learn them the old way, not through recordings, but by being around ceremonies, elders, and I consider it a sacred responsibility. Anyway, I sang several songs for him, and he was so excited, so happy to hear these wonderful songs, so different from the Cree style of singing. He said, our Indian culture is so diverse. And he points to himself and he says, I'm Cree, and I believe he also said he was Nakota, which is a branch of the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota peoples. And he may have had some other ancestry as well. I don't remember now. And then he says, now your brother there is Nehio, is Cree, but I understand that his dad is also your dad. His dad adopted you. And your background is, and I said to him, Jewish. He said, yes, we got so many different Indian peoples. I looked at Joseph, my brother. We restrained ourselves from laughing. We didn't want to embarrass the elder. But he evidently thought that Jewish was like Swinomish, Duwamish, Skokomish, Squamish. I had to share that story with you. I think it's delightful. I hope you enjoyed it. So here's some of my family. There are many others, but there's me and my brother Joseph. He's really a renowned storyteller and culture and language expert in Saskatchewan from Sturgeon Lake First Nation. My dad over there on the left, Andy, was a former chief of Sturgeon Lake First Nation. There's me and Joseph underneath after singing and sharing some songs. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is another dear elder who's passed on, Bob Smoker, who is kind of a protege and an Escapios spiritual assistant to Peter O'Chise, well known among First Nations people. And I'll share another anecdote. One time I was giving a talk. I was a keynote speaker at a First Nations health conference that was hosted by a First Nation. And a guy came over to me after my talk during the break, and he said, "I want to thank you." I shook hands with him. I didn't know. I thought he was thanking me for my lecture. Said, "I want to thank you and your family because your dad saved my life." And he told me he had been a hardened criminal, but because of my adoptive dad, because of his counseling in the prisons and his holding of ceremonies and prayers in the prisons, it completely changed his life around. So as far as he was concerned, my dad, Andy Natauhau, had saved his life. So I feel very, very honored to have been adopted by this family, and I consider it a serious responsibility. This is not something that is to be taken lightly, because it means behaving in such a way that I bring honor to my family and hopefully also bring honor to the other elders and wonderful people who have entrusted me with so many beautiful teachings. One of the very first people that I trained with, this is a later picture, but this was my beloved elder, Inchuk. He was Innu, not Inuit, okay, Innu. They're called the Montagnais in French. They are very closely related culturally and linguistically to the Cree, so much so that some people speak about Cree Innu as almost one language. It really is very, very close. And he took me on also as an apprentice at a young age. In fact, he told me, when I was, I don't know, around 20 years old, he said, you know nothing. So I'm going to teach you the way we teach our kids, starting from scratch. So a lot of my values and way of thinking are thanks to Inchuk's influence. By the way, Inchuk means otter, the otter in his language. I remember one time speaking with Inchuk, and we were in his home, and he said, "Do you know why we call ourselves the people? Why so many Native American and First Nations people, that their word in their tribal language for themselves means the people?" I said, "Why do we call ourselves the people?" I said, I'm not sure. He said, "Because we know we are only just people. There are mountain people, there are plant people, there are animal people. We are also just people, no higher nor lower than any other form of life." So Inchuk was a big influence on my path, as was Katua, also one of my very early teachers. I was again his apprentice. Yes, I know what that word means. Another time we can talk about how I managed to fit this into one life. By the way, just a hint, I did not go the academic route. Some of you are thinking, hey, I saw an MA after your name. Yeah, that was awarded to me honorarily when the university where I was supervising doctoral students realized suddenly I didn't have a degree. I remember when the president of the university called me and said, "We're doing an academic review and you forgot to put down where you got your PhD or your master's." I said, "I don't have that." "Well, where'd you get your bachelor's?" "All I've got is a high school diploma." They ended up awarding me honorarily a master's degree. The old hippie in me was very happy that he beat the system, that I got a master's without even a bachelor's. But what I'm trying to say is that I respect academics. I respect people who have these degrees. It reflects a lot of dedication and hard work. But I was called to a different path, and it really involved experiential learning with the elders. So this is Katua. He was Cherokee medicine man. He passed on in 1987. I first received my name from him and my sacred pipe, and the first person who trained me in traditional healing in what we sometimes call doctoring. And Rolling Thunder, I was one of his two apprentices. The other was a Yurok Indian from Northern California. That's me with Rolling Thunder. One time when he was visiting me in Colorado, he was also just a great, wonderful teacher. And Twyla Nitch, a member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, misnamed the Iroquois. Look, no tribe or nation wants to be called the enemy. Iroquois means enemy. It's from another tribe insulting the Seneca and the Mohawk and so forth. No, they're called the people of the Longhouse. The westernmost branch of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is the Seneca Nation. In the east, you have the Mohawk, you have the Onondaga in the center, you have the Cayuga and the Oneida around the Great Lakes, not the Great Lakes, the Finger Lakes in New York State, and the Tuscarora, who later joined up from the south. So you have a total of 6 nations. So I did get to work quite extensively with Grandma Twyla, as I call her. She's now also passed on. I have a teaching certificate from the educational organization that she was president of. Again, just a wonderful teacher whose teachings were really value-based. That is, what are the fundamental ethics and values that make us a whole and happy human being? Yet my education is not a result of what my elders taught and modeled, but the extent to which I understood and put their teachings into practice. Right? I mean, the fact that I studied with these wonderful people doesn't mean I'm not a jerk. Look, I'm only able to, you could say, be hopefully a good representative of their teachings if I live by them, if I walk my talk and talk my walk. Yeah. So if you live by it. So to me, the most meaningful lessons are those of soul searching, dreams, visions, love, parenting, and life, including finding resilience and staying true to our principles. That, to me, is the meaning of integrity, right? Staying true to our principles in the face of adversity. So finding resilience when faced with trauma, pain, or other challenges. That's where we get our big lessons. Don't you think, friends? Yeah, I think so. So what are my real degrees? Well, I've got several, but here's 2 I'm most personally proud of. But the one on the right is not an actual pipe you can hold in your hands. It's a statue of a pipe in front of the what's called the depot, or the center for an organization called the Keepers of the Sacred Tradition of Pipe Making. I'm a lifetime member, and the sacred pipe is my religion. I've been given my pipes. I didn't go out and buy them. It is a training. There are teachings and songs and stories associated with the pipe, because when you put that stone bowl together with the wooden stem, maybe the whole pipe is about 18 inches long. Some are longer, some are the length of your arm. When you put them together, you're joining together two of the oldest aspects of creation. The stone people, they were here long before us, right? When you look at a stone and you see lines in that stone, those are like wrinkles on the face of someone millions upon millions of years old. So you're joining together the stones with the moving, living, growing things, with the plants. In the creation story I learned from Inchuk, you have the stones first, and then the plants, and then the animals, and then finally the human beings. So we have the obligation to learn from our older relations. And you are joining these realms together and then putting in a mixture of sacred herbs, not hallucinogenic herbs, tobacco, the most sacred herb of all. Yeah, we can discuss that sometime. And bearberry, uva ursi, and other special plants. And you pray with that. You light it. It's not something you do every day. It's not, or at least for most people, it's not like smoking cigarettes. In fact, I would say cigarettes cause cancer. One reason is because we're misusing something that is so sacred, that was put on this earth for prayer. So if you receive a pipe, that's way beyond the PhD. That means you've proven yourself to be of service to people. You've proven yourself as having courage, as being a spiritual human being. When old Katua gave me my first pipe, I almost cried. I mean, I didn't feel worthy of that. You know what he said to me? He saw my look of insecurity. He said, if you're not worthy to carry this pipe, I don't know who is. Friends, I try to live my life to be worthy of the trust he put in me with that statement. Then on the left, again, I was thinking, well, what kind of degrees do I have? That was what Bob Smoker gave me, the Anishinaabe Cree medicine man, a protocol whip. You don't really whip people, but you chastise them at the Sundance. He had used it for years and years as a protocol whip and leader at the Sundance. And he said he really appreciated my knowledge of Native traditions and protocols, and he wanted to pass that on to me. So, yeah, those are some of my really treasured degrees. So now let's switch gears a little bit. Enough talking about myself. There are many barriers to care, although I started this talk by speaking about what I feel is the need for respectful collaboration between Western and Indigenous medicine as partners. People are still, even today, burdened by stereotypes, by ignorance, the influence of colonialism, colonial views of history. I mean, the nonsense about Columbus discovering America or that Native Americans crossed the Bering Straits. I mean, all this stuff has been disproven, but it's still part of popular consciousness. And there's an ignorance of the challenges that people face when they have gone through such a hard history of surviving genocide. I really object when someone says, well, why don't they just get over it? Yeah, you're going to get over 500 years of abuse by simply saying to someone, get over it? No, I don't think so. Look, you see that picture of one of the residential schools? Let me tell you an anecdote connected with that. One time I was at a gathering in Saskatchewan of Native people, and it was a big gathering, and there was going to be a feast afterwards. There was a man sitting next to me who I had a feeling was Lakota. Just something about his mannerism and facial characteristics and so forth. I had a feeling he was Lakota. And I showed him the respect of silence. I was always taught that's the highest form of respect, is not to try to make small talk, but just to sit in respectful silence. He knew that. He knew I was offering him respect. And at one point he said to me, with great difficulty, he said, do you know why I speak like this? Now, the way it sounded was, I said, Tunkashla is a word for grandfather. I said, Tunkashla, no, I don't know. And by the way, I did find out that he was Lakota. He showed me, he opened his mouth, and he said his tongue was cut out of his mouth when at age 8, one of the nuns in the boarding school that he'd been forced to go to, taken away from his family, one of the nuns overheard him speaking his native language, Lakota. So she brought him into another room where he was restrained, and they cut out his tongue. That is not unusual. There are worse things that I will not describe right now. So without understanding the non-colonized history of Native peoples in the Americas and the realities, the lasting realities of racism, which continues today, of intergenerational PTSD, the poverty and unemployment that faces Native people, that the government has not done nearly enough. Look, the American Indian Freedom of Religions Act was passed when, 1978? Until then, technically, Native religions in the United States were forbidden. And the act had no teeth to it, because even now, Indigenous people are often forbidden from practicing their religion in the places, the physical spaces that are the sources of that religion, which have sometimes become national parks or cities or whatever. So if there's going to be real collaboration, there also has to be there has to be an improvement in education and greater understanding of what I call the realities of Indian life, past and present. So stereotypes still remain. When I was putting in new flooring in my cabin and pulled up the old flooring, what do I find underneath but some newspapers that were there, I guess, for insulation, put there by the previous owners. And one of them was this, sort of weird, strange style of English that, believe it or not, some Americans still think Native Americans speak this way. I was very disturbed when I was at a conference, and one of my colleagues, a well-known medical doctor, was repeating a story he'd heard from me. But instead of quoting the elder who had shared the story with me in the very elegant, beautiful English that he spoke, highly educated, he substituted a Tonto and, the Lone Ranger weird sort of pidgin English. So instead of saying he knew his environment well, he said he know his environment. And I'm thinking, what the heck? So this kind of ignorance and stereotypes of other peoples, very sadly, still remains today. One of them I mentioned earlier, the Bering Straits idea that people came across the Bering Straits from the old world to the new world, that there was a land bridge between perhaps Siberia and Alaska, and that this is how native people came here, so that what we have here is a watered down version of old world spirituality. That's already been disproven. I mean, even in my book, Honoring the Medicine, I mentioned new evidence that showed at least 40 or 50,000 years occupation. But we've got evidence that shows that native people have been here. I know some of you are going to disagree, but hey, I can give you footnotes. It's not the time or place for it, but I can footnote it. Native people have been here from the beginning, and I support the indigenous origin stories. And then there's the business about Columbus discovering America. Guess what? He was a lost white man discovered by the Indians. And we have I guess we'd call it the stereotypical images in people's minds from Western movies, where everyone appears to be a Northern Plains Indian in a headdress. I remember when War Eagle, another dear old friend who's also passed on, he was Cherokee. People would come and visit him, and they'd be disappointed because he wore dirty overalls. He didn't have a headdress. He didn't look like their idea of a medicine man. Well, he had this photo in his wallet that he'd done by trick photography. And he used to say in his heavy Oklahoma accent, he'd say, well, if you don't believe I'm a medicine man, look at this. Then he'd pull out that photo. And man, I would be laughing if I was there when that was happening. And when people would see the photo, they would think, oh, yeah, that's a real medicine man. All right, now look carefully at this picture. Let me show you what he really looked like. It's going to be the same person. There's War Eagle. There's how I saw him. My dear old friend. I miss these elders so much. And his wife, who was a descendant actually of the great Comanche leader, Quanah Parker. So then what is Native American healing? Let me say from the outset that I'm giving you some general ideas about indigenous healing, but each culture, and sometimes even each person, each nation, each culture, each person can have their own ways. Diversity is the rule in Indian country. This is one of the other things that are sources of misunderstanding about Native people, or trying to create similar solutions for indigenous problems without taking into account the diversity of needs of different peoples. There are remaining today about 5 million American Indians in the United States. They're divided into 700 sovereign nations, of which I think about 550 are currently recognized. Now, I'm not including Canada. This is just in the US. I'm also not including at this point Central America and South America. So 5 million American Indians, 700 tribes, 700 nations, 225 approximately different languages, over 50 language families. Each family is different one from the other, as Tibetan from French from Arabic. So again, when people pay attention to themselves and to the land, when they have that indigenous mindset, there are some common principles, and I'm going to go over those. But we need to remember the primary principle of diversity in Native American culture. One of the other things that's different, you could say, about Native culture is the importance of stories as sources of learning, information, and even diagnostics in indigenous healing, where you listen to the story of the disease and you think, okay, when is this story starting? When is it leaving? What parts of the story has this person left out? Why have they included the parts that are in there? There's a whole way of understanding illness in terms of story. Well, take a look at this cartoon. I'm very grateful that Peter Sinclair gave me permission to use his cartoons. Wow, Little Eagle's been telling me the story of how his tribe got started with the help of bears, buffalo, and eagles. Oh, yeah, those are just old myths. That's the trouble with you Europeans. You think that just because something never happened, that it's not true. As Mark Twain put it, you can't see clearly if your imagination is out of focus. So, what then is the concept of health among some Native people? Again, the concepts are different across different tribes and nations and different healers, but there's really a parallel and similarity across them as well. Among the Nehio or Cree, there's already implicit in the name that Cree people give to themselves, the Nehio, there's already implicit in that a philosophy of health, because that word, what the Cree people call themselves, comes from the words, that is the etymology of the term, is from the word four, the number four, and body, which refers to four, quote, bodies in balance, as mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And then you can also learn a lot from the words used for health and well-being in various indigenous languages. In Cree, there are various words. One of my favorites is miopimatisuin, which is literally well and alive. But what does that imply? To me, it implies exercise, especially exercise outdoors. There's nothing wrong with the gym, but the old Cree idea of health is your exercise is a result of your way of life and the endurance you develop through that way of life. Also, eating traditional Cree food, right? That means fresh, seasonal, local, natural, sustainable. Traditional Cree food. Healthy environment, having a healthy environment for hunting, trapping, fishing, foraging, for practicing one's culture. And freedom to live in a way that honors one's cultural values. So that's, I think, a really beautiful definition of health. And yet, Cree people, like other indigenous peoples, we're all living in the modern world. And there are diseases that are treated best by Western medicine. Look, if someone's got diabetes and they are insulin dependent, they really need the insulin is going to save their life. But if you're practicing indigenous medicine, you may bring that insulin into the sweat lodge or into a ceremony and bless it and ask the Manitou to empower it so you can combine it. But there's not a denial of Western biomedicine. It's just that traditional healers say this is not the whole picture of human health. So the biomedical model is accepted that there are illnesses caused by infectious agents, by viruses, by bacteria, by metabolic abnormalities, by influence of genetics, and so forth. And here's another cartoon by Peter Sinclair. Being an Indian medicine man must be so interesting. You have so many powerful herbal potions. Well, I don't like to have people think I've got a pill to make them better. I prefer to give them a view to make them wiser. Wow, so you are so profound. You can see my aura, right? What's my aura say? And the native guy replies, take a pill, babe. So again, the biomedical model is accepted, but there's a wider view of the causes of disease and the meaning of health in indigenous medicine. So some of the other influences on health besides the biomedical are the environment, your connection or disconnection from nature, the effect of pollutants, of noise pollution, of sound pollution, food, water, light pollution, electromagnetic fields, that's EMF. By the way, the picture on the right is a NASA picture of the Earth's biomagnetic field. Look, the Earth's biomagnetic field helps to establish normal physical rhythms. So your body knows when to release certain hormones, how to transmit signals within the nervous system more efficiently. When you're removed from that natural electromagnetic environment because of our lives in homes and because of the excessive electrification of our environment, then we become dysregulated and develop all sorts of problems. So your connection with nature and actually spending time in nature is a big secret to health. And you have the psychosocial model. I remember one medicine man from the Northwest saying to me, he said, no sorcerer can do as much harm to you as you can do to yourself with negative thinking. So I think that's generally true. I would say that your cognitive habits, certainly your degree of self-esteem, your confidence in your own voice, your willingness to speak from your own voice, your connection to your family, all these psychosocial aspects are such important facets of good health. And a lack of them or a problem in self-esteem or loss of life purpose and so forth can certainly be a major influence on developing disease. Then you have the spiritual model, which has been so overplayed in the so-called New Age movement, but nevertheless important. It's part of the pie. That is your connection with spirit, with your soul, with your dreams, with Creator. Under spiritual model, I include also the possibility that there can be negative forces that can cause harm, what some people might call sorcery or brujeria in Mexico. And sometimes in the spiritual model, we could say that a person becomes ill in the big view, sort of in retrospect. Oh, the illness was my initiation into more empathy with others. It brought me to a new level of understanding myself and other people. So we could say illness as initiation, what some people would call the wounded healer. So Native American First Nations healing considers all of these practices. It's really America's original holistic medicine. What are some of the core values in medicine, which also I think apply generally to life? Well, here's a little chart I'd like you to look at for a minute. Something I developed, and that's a work in progress, the difference between Western medical ethics and First Nations medical ethics. Ethical codes, you take a more or less a vow to follow certain ethical codes. If you're a medical doctor or a nurse or a healthcare practitioner, you need that for licensure, for legal compliance. It's not the same way in indigenous culture. Ethics, it's not a matter of, there are vows, there are promises, but it's more adhering to values that were modeled for you by wisdom keepers and by elders. Fixed fee for services. To me, it is actually, look, friends, I'm speaking to you very directly. I think it's just heinous, disgusting that our society in general takes advantage of people when they are ill. When someone is ill, a caring society should be taking care of them and should never ask them to deplete their own resources. In other words, the physician, you're not going to like me, some of you are not going to like me for saying this, the physician should be the poorest of the poor because they, of all people, are in a profession that should be based on service and charity. So in the Native American tradition, there's no fees, or at least flexible fees or donations, and selfless generosity is considered essential for a successful outcome in the healing intervention. Speaking personally, I've never charged money for a ceremony or a healing, and I never will, because I believe for myself that the helping spirits would take those powers away from me, and I'd be betraying my own teachers. So I adhere to the ethics that were modeled for me by my own elders. Because I was trained, again, not as an academic, but as a traditional healer, as a practitioner. And there's adversarial medicine, destroy the disease by applying knowledge and technology. I agree, sometimes that's needed. Sometimes you need it for treating modern diseases. If someone has a clearly defined cancer, I'm all for taking it out by surgery. But Native American healing adds another element. They say that what's most important is your your harmony, your feeling of balance, your balance with your physical and your social environment, your sense of the sacred. So again, it's just a wider, I think, more inclusive view. And although Western doctors take the vow of first do no harm, conventional medicine, because it's often applied without wisdom or without sufficient training, as much as I respect it, happens to be the third leading cause of death. Whereas in indigenous medicine, the emphasis is on positive words and actions, on encouragement. It's one of the best gifts you can give another person is encouragement. And as a result, there's a very low level of adverse effect. Again, I'm not saying that even if you are yourself indigenous, that you choose indigenous healing over Western medicine. Of course not. We need Western medicine. I need it. It's been life-saving. It's just that there is much more to healing than that. So some of these values we find the core values of health and life throughout indigenous cultures. I'm just giving you an example from the Cree because it's a culture I love and that I'm part of. When you put up the 15 poles of the Cree teepee, with each pole, you're thinking of these beautiful values, obedience to spirituality and to your inner truth, respect, humility, happiness, love, faith, kinship, and so forth. I'm going to move through some of these slides a little more quickly because I do want to allow time for your reflections or questions. But you could see when you are in that teepee, you are surrounded by wisdom. You are reminded of these core ethical values. And isn't that beautiful? Number 13, that hope is interpreted by the elders, by some of the elders, as hope in the wisdom and nurturing power of women. And look at number 14, protection of the youth. These are beautiful values to live by, don't you think? Now, there are many other values. Those 15 teepee poles don't reflect the extraordinary richness of Cree ethical philosophy. There's a story that when Creator created the animals, he told them to be companions and teachers for human beings. But he also said, she also said, that humans have some unique gifts. That is the gift of truth, knowing what is true, what is not true, and justice, knowing what is just, knowing what is an example of injustice. But in this story, it says, in order to find these gifts of truth and justice, one needs to have another gift, courage, the courage to look in one's own heart. And again, just to give you an example of how widespread ethical principles are in indigenous culture, one of my other elders, the Seneca elder, Twyla Nitsch, she would begin teaching her students by explaining this wheel of values. It's the way she had started learning from her own grandfather. The gift of learning, next to learning is the idea of kinship, because learning is important to the extent it creates a feeling of connectedness, of family relations. If it's just intellectual baggage that you're carrying around, ultimately it's not going to improve your quality of life. The gift of honor, which includes self-respect, the gift of acceptance, of sight and insight, of listening. We're born with 2 ears and 1 mouth because we're supposed to listen at least twice as much as we speak. The gift of speaking one's truth, gift of love, of being of service, a balanced use of will, knowing when an act of will is required or when you need to get out of the way and let life unfold. The gift of working with creativity, not always following in someone else's ruts, having the courage to find your own path sometimes. The gift of sort of walking with magnetism, that is dynamic spirituality. Don't sit back in a cave and wait for enlightenment to come. You've got to put your wisdom into effect as service right now. And most importantly, in the North, the gift of gratitude. So these are sometimes called original instructions. And Creator's gift is a seed of wisdom. You're responsible for nurturing that seed. Life's greatest tragedy and sin is an unlived life. As Einstein put it, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. So everyone has a gift. And part of our challenge in life, according to my philosophy at least, is finding that gift and having the courage to live it. Because if you, look, friends, if you have a gift, whatever it is, and you keep it locked up inside, you'll never find out really who you are, and nor will other people find out who you are. And that gift, especially if it's a spiritual gift, it's a source of power. If you keep power like that locked up, it can become a source of your own illness. So our obligation is to find out what message Creator has put in our hearts and then have the courage to live it. Now, one of the other major facets, as I'm sure you're aware of Indigenous healing, is our connection to nature. I mentioned that early in that 4-part pie of the different aspects of health. So this repeats what I've already spoken about, basically a teaching from my dear elder Inchuk, that the stones, well, we have the Great Spirit in the center of the circle, and then the cosmos, the stars, also very ancient beings. I would agree with Carl Sagan that we are the stuff of stars. Then you have the first creation, the stone, and then the plants, then the animals, and then the human beings. And then, of course, each of the animals, each plant, each aspect of our beautiful Mother Earth has something to teach. I'll just give you a couple of examples. I took this photo when a fox walked down the snowy pathway one day and sat down. I sat outside. Luckily, my camera was nearby. This was a wild fox. We sat across from each other about 5 or 6 feet away and just sat there looking at each other. I was in ecstasy. It was absolutely wonderful. Fox has different teachings for different people, but to me, the fox is a great listener and reminds us the importance of paying attention. So that photo, by the way, was taken without a zoom lens. That's how close I was sitting to that beautiful fox. Look at that expression. That is a wise being. I would love to have the wisdom of my animal relatives. Or the wolf, who works for the good of the family, is unafraid to go alone into nature while still being a great caretaker, both the male and female wolf taking care of the children. And my dear friends, the mountain goats, about an hour and a half from where I live, we have these. I took this photo standing near that beautiful white mountain goat. You know, when you watch them climbing up the mountains, 13, 14,000 foot peak, it looks almost like they're scaling the mountain vertically. They have incredible perseverance and strength. And again, from one of my elders in the Pacific Northwest, he said the mountain goat reminds us that as you get closer, pay attention to this, as you get closer to the summit, the trail is steeper, so don't give up. Friends, listen to that again, please. And think of how it applies in your own life. As you get closer to your goal, to the summit, the trail is often steeper. That mountain goat reminds us, don't give up. And the bear. The bear is the only animal in North America, at least north of Mexico, that has a rotating forearm besides the human being. In Mexico, you have monkeys who can also do that, but there's no other animal in North America besides human beings and bears that can do this. Why is that important? Because that gives bears the manual dexterity to dig up healing plants. So there's always been a deep association between bears and plant medicines, as well as bears and dreams, because the bear goes to sleep in the fall, sleeps through the winter. The female bear gives birth to the cubs during hibernation, and then miraculously reappears in the springtime. So the bear takes us from through our own winter, the evening, to the springtime, which is the morning. And so there are beautiful teachings and stories associated with the bear and what the bear can teach us about dreaming. And of course, the buffalo, who reminds us to live with deep respect for all of nature, And that when the buffalo was killed, every aspect of the buffalo was used. The buffalo was killed with respect. Often there was an offering made by hunters and indigenous cultures all over the world. It might be a little bit of tobacco or cornmeal in the mouth. But then every part of that buffalo used for clothing, for tools, for food. So the buffalo reminds us to be good caretakers, responsible caretakers of our beautiful Mother Earth and all of her creatures. And yes, plant medicines as well, also part of indigenous healing. These are prescription sticks. The Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, would sometimes, a medicine man or woman, there have always been both, would put symbolic images, would draw representations of the plants that were being recommended for the particular patient. So these essentially were prescriptions. And the difference, though, from Western medications is that these medicines are gathered in nature and with prayers and often with songs, with offerings. There's a particular protocol so that the plant will, in a sense, release its healing gifts. As one example, I live in an area where we have a great deal of this wonderful plant that very important to Cree and to other people. It's popularly called osha. Some people call it bear root, tobacco root. There are words for it in indigenous languages. I will sing the song specific to the bear root when I dig it. And then as a result, the plant feels it has been respected and will be far more potent as a healer. Now, what scientists want to know is, okay, I hear all this cultural stuff, but can you measure it? Well, a little tricky to answer that question. Here's what I came up with. You can't measure spirit or healing energy directly, but you can measure its correlates. That is, thunder is a correlate of lightning. Lightning is a correlate of thunder. They go together, but they're not the same. So there are biochemical and bioelectric and other changes that occur in human beings in the course of receiving a Native American healing or doing a Native American healing practice, perhaps a healing song, a healing meditation. Yes, there are meditations among indigenous cultures. And then you can see what these practices do on Western scientific instrumentation. So you're finding a correlate of healing energy, but you're not measuring the healing energy in and of itself. I believe this concept of correlates can satisfy both the scientist and the mystic. So among those correlates, we find you can measure the effects of music, such as auditory driving. That is, a particular drum beat will cause the neurons in the brain to fire synchronously at more or less the same rhythm. And we know the psychological effects and benefits of that rhythm. That is, when you're hearing the drum beat and your brain starts to react to that drum beat, it puts you in an alpha theta state where you're more intuitive, more in touch with yourself, among other things. I mean, it's fantastic what we're able to measure. The effect of heat, healing effects of heat in the sweat lodge, the effect of periods of fasting, followed by multiple sensory overload, to use a Western term. I don't consider it overload, but how wonderful when you're in a healing lodge and there's the sight of the dancers and there's the sound of the drum and there's the whole room is filled with plumes of cedar smoke. So you're being saturated, and that really pushes you into a new realm, another realm. And then you can measure neurophysiologic effects. You can measure even changes in the light, the intensity and frequency of light emitted from cells during Native American healing. We call that biophoton emission. And you can measure, the chemical effects of herbs, what would be called the active agents, the effects of social support, placebo, psychological changes. There are therapeutic touch, that's the TT, therapeutic touch studies that show that that healing touch, sometimes without even physical touch, can have dramatic measurable effects. Well, that kind of energy healing, one might say, is an essential part of many styles of Native American healing. So the studies on therapeutic touch or healing touch, as well as the studies, Western scientific studies on the effects of prayer, on intent, electricity on or around the body, those are highly relevant for revealing correlates of the healing energies evoked through indigenous healing modalities. These have been studied extensively in many experiments, one at the Menninger Institute, where they found that healers, including some indigenous healers, were able to produce extraordinary surges in electricity on the body and extraordinary changes in brainwaves. These are my own brainwaves. I was one of the 9 healers studied as a research subject in the Menninger Institute experiments called Physical Fields and States of Consciousness. You'll notice in the right hemisphere of the brain, the lower graph, upper one is the left, the amplitude of the waves, that is the amount of electricity being generated by my brain, was actually beyond their scale of measurement. By the way, I was not physically moving. This was all done with my eyes closed just through intent. So this means something is measurable. It is happening. It's a correlate. And here the same thing, that during the healing, there was an electrical spike measured with an electrode on the ear and on the ankle, that as soon as a voice came over the loudspeaker, please begin, all of a sudden there was about a 15-volt spike, not microvolt or millivolt, 15-volt spike in electricity. Again, does that mean electricity is the power of spirit? No, of course not. It means that the power of spirit is producing something measurable on our instruments. And with the sweat lodge, perhaps the most popular of all Native American healing rituals, again, lots of studies that are relevant, usually looking at the effect of sauna or heat. I think those effects will be multiplied and far greater in the sweat, because there you also have prayer. It's not just heat. Nevertheless, these studies are suggestive that you find improved heart function and exercise ability among patients with heart failure if they're in a sauna. So there's been, again, all kinds of studies showing positive effects of sauna and heat, especially in decreasing cardiovascular risk and also in decreasing risk of dementia. All of this published in standard Western peer-reviewed scientific journals. So you can see here some of the effects of sauna. Again, I personally believe that these effects are multiplied many times over if someone is in a traditional Native American sweat lodge. So science is slowly catching up with indigenous wisdom. We've got studies on the effects of distant intentionality, that those who are prayed for, even without their knowledge, they have less doctor's visits, less hospitalization, less severity of illness. Again, the list goes on and on. Friends, I'm just giving you a bare sampling of the amount of material that's available in Western scientific literature that is relevant to interpreting Native American healing within a different paradigm, but nevertheless an important paradigm. So in the Annals of Internal Medicine, standard peer-reviewed journal, a standard medical journal, they saw the effects of distant healing by analyzing other published studies. That's called a meta-analysis. And the results were highly statistically significant. The list goes on and on. Studies of non-contact healing published in 2015, similar results. And also studies on the effect of having a greater sense of life purpose. Here's one example from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, published in 2014. People who were followed, over 7,000 individuals followed for 6 years, all took psychological tests, particularly one called the Psychological Well-Being Scale. And the conclusion was the greater the sense of life purpose, the more the longevity, and the less number of nights in a hospital if you had to be hospitalized, less anxiety and depression. So remember what I spoke about earlier, finding your gifts, your purpose, the consequences of not having the courage to live or find your gifts. Well, this is, you could say, I hate to use the word proven, but there's corroborating evidence, let's put it that way, within Western science. And the effects of stillness and mindfulness and silence, inner silence. A major aspect of indigenous values is cultivating silence. Meditation has always existed among Native American peoples. In fact, it was necessary for survival among all peoples. If you go back in time long enough, we all came from hunter-gatherers, including Europeans, all people. To be an effective hunter, your mind has to be quiet. Because if you're thinking, you're generating stress hormones, you're generating body odor, and the animals smell you from miles away. Inner silence is in our genes of all people and still strongly emphasized in indigenous spirituality. Yet there are many things that we cannot measure and maybe we'll never measure. I think it's sheer arrogance to assume that everything can be measured or that everything should be measured. So there's a unique magic that occurs when there's a particular person at a particular time in their life, in a particular place, with a particular healer that is non-replicable, which means it cannot conform to the standards of Western science. And there are acausal effects that cannot be explained by Newtonian mechanics. There are non-local, non-temporal effects that are simply beyond, I think, beyond the capacity of science to explain. So friends, if you'd like to continue learning, just a few resources. By the way, that's me drumming as part of the Idle No More activism. I'm also an activist. You can attend Indigenous powwows, concerts, art shows, other public events, support with time, with volunteering, and with money, desperately needed. These worthy organizations, this is only a few of them, the Native American Rights Fund, American Indian College Fund, First Nations Development Institute, supporting Native-owned businesses and museums, be an advocate and activist for Indigenous rights, and continue reading, learning respectfully, and sharing. Finally, we are in interesting times. Yeah, there's a lot of horrible things happening in the world, but there are also deep new connections being made. Some of it thanks to internet. You could say the positive side of the internet. I'm not sure the positive outweighs the negative. That's another conversation. Here we find a Cherokee man, the one on the right, a Hawaiian, and a Mexican, all using the conch shell as a way of opening a ceremony and basically saying to the people, wake up. And my dear friend, Chief Phil Lane, very appropriately in the headdress, every feather of which he has earned, here in Ecuador, sharing the sacred pipe ceremony with some indigenous relatives from that country. So I want to thank you so much for joining me. I can't see you all. I hope you're all still awake. And really, I hope that some of these messages go to heart and can open some doorways to understanding for all of you. It's been a deep honor to be part of Humanity Rising, to sit here with you. So hi, thank you very much. And perhaps we can have some questions in the chat.
Thank you so much, Ken. Your presentation was wonderfully illuminating and so beautiful. It was said that beautifully balanced presentation with stories and research studies by Rita Marsh. And I'm Shannon MacArthur. I work with Stan and with Jim and Humanity Rising. Stan and I are part of the after chat. And so we'll be going there after we finish some questions that we did glean from the chat. So first, I want to say how grateful I am for your being willing to come and talk to us at Humanity Rising. I am very impressed with your background. We would love to hear all those stories that you couldn't tell us because of the time restraints. And we'll go deeper into those perhaps in the after chat. I want to tell you, where Jim is where I was. And during one of our ceremonies at the pyramids, we um, we had to play the role of being tourists to diffuse the attention of the guards because they had taken away the flowers that our Sophia and her husband were going to use in ceremony to bless what was going on. And when you talked about people being interfered with, it is happening in these now times, and it's just such a shame. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's well aware of that. And speaking about Mexico and the Mayan people, that tradition, we have to be, here's another thing, I didn't even address, and that is that Native Americans are not in museums. They're in the world today. They're part of our lives. They're just as proud when their children gets a PhD and has some recognition and becomes a famous author, as we have many wonderful Indigenous authors, Pulitzer Prize winning authors. So this is not something from the past, and the Mayan people are not in the past. They are there today. We could have spent some of the time speaking about Mayan medicine. I'm not an expert in that, but I do know that the Mayan people, for example, have Jup acupuncture, probably long before the Chinese. Again, I can footnote that. And they recognize the importance of healing energy, which I don't speak Mayan, but phonetically it would be pronounced chulel, which is the healing energy for Mayan people, and it's treated and balanced in a way analogous to the way Chinese acupuncturists treat imbalances in healing energy. So the richness of techniques, knowledge, and wisdom among Indigenous peoples throughout the world is absolutely astounding and unknown to most people. I remember one time I was in a taxi. I was on my way to give a talk about First Nations healing at a educational center in New York City. The taxi driver picked me up and he asked me what I was doing. I told him where I was going, what I was going to do. You know what this guy actually said to me? He said, well, you mean there are still American Indians in the United States? Yeah. I sort of put him straight as much as I could, but there's that level of ignorance, and education is certainly one of the keys. But it can't be only education. It has to be activism as well, actually putting your feet on the ground and joining the marches and finding some way to bring some teeth to these laws that supposedly protect Native American rights, but often do very little, in fact.
So much is being, excuse me, so much is being done now, Ken. And the activism, the people are beginning to be brave and standing up for what they know is true and right. The integrity of people is shining more strongly than people understand. And as we stand up, we can get our friends to stand up with us, and that's how it grows. The ubiquitousness of the First Nations peoples. There was someone who asked, didn't the Tibetans believe they were part of the Hopi as their beginnings? Do you know anything about that?
No, it's not that they believe they were part of the Hopi or that the Hopi were part of the Tibetans, but they, like other indigenous people, have found surprising connections in art, in philosophy. In the case of Hopi and Tibetans, they found some connections linguistically, and I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in that area, so I'm not sure to what degree. It could have been just a few words that were similar. Other people have noted a similarity in Zuni and Japanese, that Zuni is a language that's an anomaly among Southwestern peoples. And yet there seems to be some similarity of all languages with the Japanese language. But does that mean that one came from the other? No, it just means that we probably all come from a common earth and common root. And if you look closely enough, you're going to find similarities all over the world.
That would be really interesting, wouldn't it? What a study that would be. And your talk about the ethics, the chart that you gave us, and the 15 poles of the Cree Teepee. Ken, you presented your information so beautifully, and you're obviously very, very, it's dyed in the wool in you. And it's such a pleasure to hear from you. When I looked up, now you haven't put anything yet in the chat for our people to go and find your books and whatnot.
Well, I'm the worst businessman in the world. Look,
oh, you're not.
My wallet. I usually carry everybody's business card except my own. So.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask you another question. I went looking for your information because you hadn't put anything in. And what I found was a Kenneth S. Cohen with a book on Qigong. Is that you?
That's also me. It's my other hat.
Well, your other hat.
I speak Chinese fluently.
Do you? Do you know that Jim Garrison was born in China?
Yes, I think he had mentioned that. So, look, let me explain it this way. Well, first, let me add this.
Okay.
1 second.
I know I'm trying to make you do two things at once, and doing two things at once makes both of them neither.
I think I did it correct. Let me make sure I didn't misspell anything.
Honoringthemedicine.com, also a Facebook page you can find as Honoring the Medicine, Kenneth Cohen.
Yeah, if you just do a search, you'll find it. Okay,
Excellent.
Now what about the Qigong business? I've been practicing Qigong for more than 50 years, also Chinese martial arts and Tai Chi. So that's how I make my living. And like other people who are involved in traditional healing, I don't charge money for healing or ceremony, so I have my day job. Luckily, my day job is something that I absolutely love. So I do speak Chinese. I just don't mix the paradigms, as you could tell from the talk I just gave. So the example I like to give would be if I were teaching a class, let's say I spoke fluent French. My French is very poor, by the way, and Chinese. And I was giving a class in French. May I never do that. And I started the class like this. Maintenant, mes amis, je vais vous enseigner un peu de français, mais 我的中国话说得比较流利. So I started by saying, now my friends, I'm going to teach you some French. But then I switched to the Chinese language and said, but my Chinese is actually much more fluent. No one's going to learn anything in that class if I keep switching languages. So I'm very comfortable in the Chinese context. I'm still a pretty darn good martial arts. I haven't lost my speed in sparring, and I teach Tai Chi, several styles of Qigong. I teach Baguazhang, Xingyi Quan, other related Chinese martial arts. It's my job that pays the bills. I love it. I'm happy I do that. But my fundamental core, you could say, the values I live by were certainly from my native elders. So these are my two hats. I just don't mix them. I don't like chop suey spirituality, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because you end up digging 100 wells, but none deep enough to strike water.
Oh, I have heard that. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ken. We might get back to the Qigong thing in the after chat, but first I want to ask you one last question before we go over there. Rita Marsh asked, Ken, can you speak to the influence of Wetiko on the Western culture? Now, we have had a Humanity Rising episode devoted to Wetiko. And so...
As a negative spirit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me first get back to something else that we were just talking about, because you mentioned you found my book, The Way of Qigong. I do have a book, Honoring the Medicine, on Native American healing and spirituality. And that's the one that, the book that won a National Book Award. So that's my primary literary work as well, both published by Penguin Random House. So Honoring the Medicine is the name of the Native American Indigenous book.
Dan has put that link in the chat.
So to me, the Witiko, again, that's not, a little bit outside my area of expertise, but the little bit I know, they seem to be similar to the hungry ghosts of Buddhism. That is the mouth the size of a pin and the stomach the size of an elephant. So it's I think it's a spirit of greed and uncaring that I believe is being invoked and strengthened because of people's behavior and mindset today. What can we do? What can we do about it? It's the same things I mentioned before: the activism, voting your conscience, living a good life, being a good example, being a good ancestor. Because we're all going to be ancestors for the coming generations. So how do we want to be remembered by those future generations? And essentially being the light and the wisdom that we are advocating, being that in the world. I don't think there's any other way to stop it. I mean, voting, activism, and living with wisdom, compassion, and love. Are things going to get better? I don't know. I don't let my mind really go there. To me, I pray with my pipe. I keep doing my practices, live the best life I can be, try to practice to the best of my ability kindness, don't hide out from my own faults, and just do my part to make a better world.
I feel very strongly like you do, Ken, that we walk the path that's before us with integrity and grace and look for the beauty in life. I want to get into deeper conversation with you, sir. And so I'm going to invite Stan to put the link to the after chat in the chat. I'm seeing notes to me in there, so I'm a little distracted, but I know Stan is going to put that in there at any moment. So I want to tell you, Ken, that you have you touched the hearts of the people, and that Stan collects the links from this episode and the after chat and the chats from both, and he sends out a daily email with those links. So you will be getting that later on today after he does his work.
His email address.
Sorry. Oh, well, we'll make sure that you get his email address, Stan, and thank you so much for being there and watching over us. And I do see the link in the after chat, or in the chat to the after chat. So I want to invite everyone to click that link, and we'll see you over in the after chat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chimigwich. Thank you to everyone, and blessings to all of you. I'm going to click on the after chat myself right now, so we'll end this portion of our discussion.
And we'll see you there. Bye for now. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Everybody has about 5 seconds to click the after chat link before I close down this section.